All right, let's dive into the plan behind what is, without a doubt, one of the boldest military operations ever attempted, D-Day. You have to put yourself back in 1944. The Allies were facing this monumental challenge, this wall they called Fortress Europe, and the scale of what they had to do was just staggering. So what were they up against? Well, it was called the Atlantic Wall, and it was a beast. We're talking 3,100 miles, think about that distance, of coastal defenses. It wasn't just a wall, it was a whole system of concrete bunkers, massive minefields, and heavy guns, all designed for one single purpose: to throw any invasion right back into the sea. And on the other side, ready to smash into that wall, a force of 3 million Allied soldiers, sailors, and airmen. I mean, an army, navy, and air force of a size the world had never seen before, all packed into southern England, waiting for the green light on the biggest amphibious assault in human history. So that sets up the big question, right? How on earth do you pull something like that off? I mean, how do you even start to plan for an attack on that scale against a defense that strong? This was no sure thing. So let's break down how they actually did it. You know, the first piece of the puzzle surprisingly comes from a massive failure. Go back 2 years before D-Day to 1942. A force, mostly Canadian troops, tried to raid the French port of Dieppe. The idea was simple, right? Test the defenses, see what it would take. But it was an absolute catastrophe, a total bloodbath. But that disaster, as brutal as it was, taught them some incredibly valuable lessons. Lesson number 1. Attacking a fortified port head-on, that's just a suicide mission. Don't do it. Lesson 2. You absolutely have to bombard the defenses before your troops hit the beach. It's not optional. And lesson 3. You need special equipment. You can't just send regular tanks onto a beach. You need machines that can handle the chaos, clear mines, cross ditches, all things they learned the hard way at Dieppe. So you could say Dieppe was the tragic but essential first draft for D-Day.
Okay, so now they had a pretty solid what not to do list. With that in hand, they could start building the real plan. And the first step, the first pillar of the whole thing, wasn't about tanks or ships. It was about psychology. It was about winning the mind game. They decided to build their entire strategy around a classic military idea, the element of surprise. I mean, the goal wasn't just to punch through the Atlantic Wall. The goal was to hit it where the Germans weren't looking, to make all those guns and bunkers basically useless because they were all pointing the wrong way. And this led to something called Operation Fortitude, which is honestly one of the wildest deception plans in all of history. Seriously. The Allies created an entire ghost army, a completely fake army group, and they even put the famous General George Patton in command of it to make it look legit. They had inflatable tanks, dummy planes, they broadcast fake radio traffic all day long, and they used German spies they had turned to feed a steady stream of lies back to Berlin. The whole point? To convince Hitler that the real invasion was going to hit Pas de Calais, the most obvious spot to cross the channel.
And did it work? Oh man, did it ever. The payoff was huge. Churchill put it best. Never in the history of warfare have so many been immobilized by so few. I mean, think about this. Hitler kept 13 whole divisions of his army up in Norway, just sitting there waiting for an attack that was never going to happen. And even more importantly, he kept his best tank divisions near Calais, miles and miles away from Normandy, where the real landings were about to go down. Now, pulling off a secret that big, with so many different countries and armies involved, that's a recipe for disaster if you're not careful. It required something totally new, a single unified command structure. So they created SHAEF, the supreme headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Force, and put one guy, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, in charge of the whole shebang. It was the only way to make sure every single piece of this massive, complicated puzzle moved together. So, okay, the deception plan is in place. They're going to fool the Germans about where they're landing. But that creates a brand new, maybe even bigger problem. How in the world do you keep a massive army supplied once it's on those beaches? This was the logistical nightmare keeping the planners up at night. Remember the lesson from Dieppe? Attacking a port is a death trap. But the problem is, the beaches in Normandy, well, they're just beaches. There's no port. And an army without supplies, without food, ammo, fuel, it just grinds to a halt. The invasion would have literally starved to death on the French coast in a matter of days. So what's the solution? If you can't capture a port? Well,
You bring your own. And this is where we get to the Mulberry Harbors, truly one of the most incredible engineering achievements of the entire century. The plan, and this sounds completely insane, was to build 2 gigantic artificial harbors in Britain, tow them across the English Channel in pieces, and then just assemble them right off the beaches of Normandy. It's an idea that is just, wow, absolutely audacious.
And here's the nuts and bolts of how they did it. First, they sailed a bunch of old ships over and sank them on purpose. This created a line of breakwaters they called gooseberries to calm the waves. Then came the main event, these enormous hollow concrete blocks called phoenixes. We're talking the size of a 5-story building. They towed them over and sank them in a precise line to create the outer walls of the harbor. And then, the final touch, these amazing floating steel roads called whales connected the shore to these deepwater piers, so ships could unload around the clock no matter what the tide was doing. So how critical was this? Let me put it this way. Just one of the harbors, Mulberry B, handled 4 million tons of supplies in the 5 months it was running. 4 million tons! It wasn't just helpful, it was the absolute lifeline. It's what fed the entire Allied army as it pushed into France. All right, so they've got the deception plan to fool the enemy. They've got the incredible logistical plan to supply the troops. Now we get to the final piece of the puzzle, the actual on-the-ground tactical plan for the assault itself. And this whole part of the plan was driven by another fundamental military idea, the principle of the objective. Basically, it means that every single thing you do, from the highest-ranking general down to the private with a rifle, has to be aimed at a clear, simple, and achievable goal. No confusion. Everybody needs to know what they're supposed to do and why. And you can see this perfectly in Eisenhower's main order for the entire operation. It's not some 50-page document full of military jargon. It's beautifully simple. It boils down to this. Land on the Normandy coast, build up your forces, then pursue the enemy and destroy them. That's it. Simple, direct, and something every single soldier could understand. But from that simple, high-level goal came an incredible amount of detailed planning. That big objective was broken down into hundreds of smaller ones. If you look at a map for, say, Omaha Beach, you'll see every single unit had its own zone, its own objectives, its own timetable. It was like a massive, complex symphony, but every single note was designed to play in harmony with that one simple tune from Eisenhower. Of course, there's that old military saying, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And on June 6, 1944, this incredibly detailed, perfectly crafted blueprint was about to slam head-on into the brutal, unpredictable reality of war. You can see this perfectly by looking at the 2 American beaches. It's a real tale of 2 different wars. Over at Utah Beach, things went, all things considered, pretty well. They actually landed in the wrong place, but it turned out to be a spot with weaker defenses. They secured the beach pretty quickly. But then, there was Omaha. Just a few miles down the coast, Omaha Beach was an absolute meat grinder. A near disaster. Everything that could go wrong did. The rough seas sank most of the special amphibious tanks. The pre-invasion bombing completely missed the German defenses, and worse, intelligence had missed that a tough veteran German division had just moved into the area. It was just a brutal lesson that sometimes war comes down to pure dumb luck. So that begs the question, right? If things went so horribly wrong at Omaha, how did D-Day succeed at all? Well, it's because the foundation of the plan, the blueprint itself, was just that good. The strategic deception, Operation Fortitude, it worked perfectly. The main German reinforcements were still waiting for Patton to land at Calais. The logistical miracle of the Mulberry Harbors was already on its way. And maybe most importantly, because the objectives were so clear and simple, it gave the guys on the ground, the lieutenants and the sergeants, the ability to improvise and lead when the master plan went to pieces. The blueprint was strong enough to bend, but it didn't break. You don't even have to take my word for it. Listen to what the Germans thought. Hitler's own Minister of Armaments, Albert Speer, later said that all their work, all those years spent building the Atlantic Wall, was made worthless because of what he called the simple genius of the Allies bringing their own harbors. When your enemy admits your plan was brilliant, you know you did something right. And that really leaves us with this final question to think about. Victory is never a sure thing, but could the Allies possibly have succeeded without this plan? A plan that was just as daring in its engineering as it was clever in its strategy? When you look back, D-Day wasn't just a victory won with bullets and bravery. It was a victory won on the drawing board, a victory of planning, of deception, and of incredible, audacious innovation.